recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note that this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded, unlike myself, to use the microphone when speaking, which I didn't do when I started. Okay, good evening, everybody. Do we have any appointments or substitutes?
Yeah. Yes, we have one substitute, Bill Amos, here this evening for Lucy Hodgson.
Bill, thank you very much and welcome to the committee. Any declarations of interest? None? Do we have any public participation this evening, Julian?
No. Chair, do I need to declare that I'm the only post-menopause woman in the room?
No, you don't. But it's nice of you to let us know. Thank you. Thank you. Any minutes? The minutes of the last meeting. Are people content with the minutes of the last meeting? If that is so, I shall sign them as a fair record. Thank you. Okay, we go to agenda item 5, which is review of the alcohol and drugs policy and procedure. And for clarification, that does not mean we will have to take them. And this is how we do it. This is the policy within the council. Who's leading on that one? Is that you? Sean. Oh, Sean. Oh, you are video. I thought you were going to be live.
My 10 days time's out tonight, Chair, so I thought I should stay put. So good evening, everybody. This agenda item relates to an existing council policy, which is the council's policy and procedure relating to drugs and alcohol. The proposal tonight is to amend the policy to enhance the provisions around the ability for the council to undertake random drug testing in circumstances where there is a notifiable concern or a health and safety risk. So just to recap, in terms of the policy itself and the covering report, members may be familiar with this policy. We've had it in place for some time. The purpose is to make it absolutely clear that in our workforce, we do not expect misuse of intoxicating substances, and as regards illegal substances, clearly we must have a zero tolerance policy, which we do. The importance of a policy for a workforce like ours is a number of our roles involve health and safety, being responsible for significant pieces of machinery or activities which put employees or members of the public or others potentially at risk, and therefore it's important we have a very clear position in terms of staff not working when they're under the influence of intoxicating substances, drugs or alcohol. So that's the policy that we already have in effect. The policy has served us well, but we have had occasion to use it. And we have felt satisfied that it was necessary to review it and strengthen the provision around random drug testing, randomized drug testing, which means that we have actually a contract in place with a pharmaceuticals company who can do some drug testing for us and provide us with a fair degree of accuracy about whether people have been under the influence of substances whilst they've been at work. Now, of course, it's important that the council exercises these powers proportionately and has regard to individuals' rights in doing so. But as I said, we have to balance that against our health and safety obligations. The amendment to the policy is something we've consulted with the trade unions about, and because it is a modest amendment and it's just driven by that safety consideration, the unions have been supportive of that amendment. And we've taken that through the Joint Consultative Committee and they've also been supportive of it. So we propose it to you tonight for adoption, members, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Sean, my one question is drugs stay in the system a very long time and we see them in the magistrates' court on a regular basis, where someone has openly admits that they took cannabis or whatever maybe a week ago, but then was stopped driving, not for impairment, but then were found to have drugs in the system. How are we going to deal with that if we do a random test, no one's showing impairment, but are we going to inform? I think we need to educate our staff about that, because not many people know that. And then how are we going to deal with that? Should we, hopefully we won't have to come across it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's true that we need to make sure that the workforce are educated about the implications of activities, recreational activities that might impact at work. It's equally important, though, that we have an absolute measure of under the influence and not being able to operate safely at work, which is why we use a third-party provider to help us with our measurement when we do consider that there is a cause for concern and we do wish to test. So it's not the case that we're going to be introducing randomized drug testing at work as a sort of a daily reality for people, but in response to either patterns of concerning behaviour or notifications that there's something we should look at, then it is something we will introduce. We will make sure that the workforce is educated about being very cognizant of the decisions they take and the impact they might have at work. But we've also been very clear with people that when you work for the council, you are expected to uphold some quite high standards of conduct. And when you wear your uniform and you're out and about, you are, an ambassador for the city, and therefore we do have high standards. We clearly, if we have a situation where somebody hasn't been operating unsafely, then we have obviously the ability to give them advice and support and guidance and make sure that they're supported in terms of good behaviour. But if we have a situation where we think somebody has been unsafe, then clearly we will need to act appropriately.
Thank you very much, Sean. That puts my mind at rest. Anyone else have any questions? No? Lovely. Thank you very much, Sean. We then move on to, do we need to approve that? Do we need to vote? Let me just go back and remind myself of the recommendation.
Yes, please, Chair. Yes, please.
Yeah. So we need to approve that. All those in favour of the recommendation? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, which is our new policy on menopause.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, this is a new policy for the council. It's something that a number of employers are looking at. We understand from personnel professional bodies that the impact of the menopause at work is something that a lot of employers have had cause to think about in terms of adjustments they might make for their workforce performance considerations and so forth. And the other thing I'd want to say is, as a sort of introductory comment, is that during the course of this year, we have been doing work with groups of staff about equality, diversity and inclusion, and considering the things that impact on you at work at different stages in your life, and how the employer should be mindful of those. And in the context of equalities and protected characteristics, menopause was something that came up quite a lot. And it's something, again, that we've seen is consistently raised by staff as well as employers. And I think the reason for that is that there probably isn't a comfortable language around it yet. So in the same way that now we can have a conversation at work about pregnancy-related reasons and scenarios in which somebody who's pregnant may require some level of adjustments. The purpose of this policy is really, again, just to give managers and staff the language to have those conversations, to recognise that the menopause itself can be quite a long process, that it can create symptoms which are quite different in terms of their appearance, their manifestation, particularly in the workplace, to perhaps something conventionally that might be thought of like hot flushes, for example. There can be some quite different symptoms that might affect mental health or concentration, which can have an impact on performance at work. And of course, with all of our policies, we must view them in the context of delivering services and meeting our obligations. So understandably, you'll see that the policy talks about potential referrals for occupational health and impact on performance, because it isn't the case that the council can adjust indefinitely for situations that might arise, but the council needs to be an open-minded and supportive employer and see what adjustments can be made. So as I say, the policy is to equip everybody to have the language, to have the conversations, and to manage this supportively through our appropriate other HR policy mechanisms. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but that's a summary of the policy objectives, essentially.
Again, Sean, thank you very much. Questions from the committee. I've got Louis.
Okay, I've got two questions. In the report, it says that managers will be given a training document, policy and guidelines and so on. It's just really a question of how will that be ensured that that is sort of embodied and taken up by managers? Because if it's just sent as an email, could it just be left read, ununderstood, or sort of internalized? There's a question about that, about the training. Is just sending an email enough? The second question I've got is, there's always a potential when you introduce something like this that it could be seen as another way of, another stick to hit a group of people with, in terms of redundancy or other sort of management processes. And what sort of safeguards will we put in to make sure that that doesn't happen in the case of menopause?
Through you, Chair. In answer to the first question, what I would say is that the group of managers that we would identify are called our wider management team. And when we work with wider management team, we don't just work with them through our new communication channels like Microsoft Teams and our chat forums and our message boards. We also come together collectively and talk face to face. And we've identified that at staff conference and wider management teams, it is important to use those slots to talk about staff issues, including equalities issues. And this would be one of those issues where we would have a dialogue with managers. So although there is a guidance document ready to go out, which has come from the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, we would also want to support that with a council-led conversation. So just to reassure you there that won't just be emailed round, it will be the subject of a discussion at a wider management team meeting. It will also then be followed up and reinforced by the HR team. And because we're a small council, they do work closely with all services to support on individual issues. Then in terms of how we make sure that people aren't subject to detriment, I mean, I guess I would land on that word because that's a legal word that relates to the concept of discrimination. And it would be possible for somebody to be subject to less favourable treatment, detriment, for a reason related to the menopause. And if that was the case, it would be possible for that to be discrimination and therefore unlawful. But of course, the steps to go through are to consider whether that is the reason for a decision or a policy that's put into place or a less favourable treatment. You'd have to establish that cause and effect first. And as regards something like performance is concerned, I mean, that's the whole purpose of having policy, is to identify that menopausal symptoms might be contributing to performance, and can that be managed in a supportive way? So you would expect that staff would equip themselves with knowledge of this policy as well, if they felt that they weren't being appropriately supported at work. We have within the council structure, we have mental health champions, and we have wellbeing advisors. We have people other than someone's line manager that they can talk to if they wish to raise a concern. And I suppose the last point really is that this is quite a personal topic, and not all staff may wish to raise it. So obviously, necessarily, the onus would need to be on the employee to say that this is something that they were experiencing that they felt was important in relation to their job. And we're not going to force anybody to tell us that this is what's going on. It's just about putting the language out there to make the conversations comfortable if people do want to talk about it.
Sean, thank you. Any more questions from anyone? I've got one from Councillor Denham. Lynn.
I mean, not a question, but to say, you know, I very much welcome this policy. It is new for this council and this employer, and it is, you know, acknowledging what is a normal biological process, but that can affect people in different ways and can affect people's performance at work. So if we can, you know, increase understanding of that, absolutely welcome it. I am intrigued that this is, please note that this is an output from the work that the council is doing around equality and inclusion. I think when I proposed the motion at full council last year, I'm not sure that this was the first output that I expected. It is maybe an indicator of the workforce of the council. I very much welcome it and, you know, commend the work that officers are doing around inclusion and diversity within the council.
Thank you, Lynn. I've got no more questions. Then those in favour of approving the recommendation to accept this new policy, please raise your hands. Again, Julian, unanimous. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 7, which Shane, I believe you're delivering, which is the outcome of the postal vote review of the 21 elections.
Thank you, Chair. As members will recall, there was a specific issue with what was an election which was complicated but extremely well run, and for the most part, and I need to express thanks to everyone involved in the team for managing what was a very difficult set of processes to achieve an outcome which was extremely well received and effective. The specific incident I'm referring to is a case of a number of postal votes which didn't get presented to the voters by the relevant time, and resulted in us having to put in place through some queries to the system to understand exactly what had gone wrong and try to quantify the total number of votes which were missing, which we were able to do through following the routines and processes that were available, and then set in place a process whereby we could ensure that every voter who'd been missed off the list received the postal vote pack by hand with instructions as how to return them in good time, and including collecting them by hand if necessary as well, if that was what the voter preferred. So it's important to stress that everyone who wanted to vote at the election had the opportunity to do that, and the integrity of the election was 100% intact. Nonetheless, it was very important to me that we understood exactly why that particular batch had gone missing, what had caused the problem, and to make sure, therefore, that we could put in place steps to ensure that that wouldn't recur. So this involved a lengthy forensic work with our providers, Civica Electoral Services, or CES, as I referred to in the report. And after search of a number of systems and reconciliations, we narrowed it down to a particular batch, which was filed on one day. And the appendix to the report sets out an email which sets out some of the history of that. But in effect, it was a one day where we issued 2 versions of data over to CES. One of those versions included the additional batch of 502 and the other one didn't. And when the reason for issuing those was because CES had been requesting data in a certain format so that they could run all 3 elections at once, so that voters got one postal vote pack rather than 3 different ones, or 2 different ones according to how many elections they were participating in. And it became evident that the data for one didn't seem quite right for one reason or another. Either CS weren't happy with it or we weren't happy with it. So it was agreed to use the other file. Unfortunately, that was the file with the missing batch. So when we were reconciling our totals overall, we found that we sent the same amount, that they'd received the same amount, but 502 votes weren't missing. As I say, it was a complex process. You can see from the details there were a lot of exchange of information at the time. And it's important to understand how we can improve on that position. three things are obvious from the recommendation. One was that we were using different terminology. We were referring to ballot papers and they were referring to postal vote packs, which caused quite a bit of confusion. That there wasn't an ongoing daily reconciliation of batch control totals. We were looking at overall control totals, which I say matched for the reason that some were excluded. So we will be putting in place an improved quality control process by the Deputy Returning Officer at every stage. So we'll have a regular reconciliation process. And finally, we want to make sure that when information is processed and passed over, that we have an ongoing discussion between the parties, because one of the things which was also clear is that we weren't escalating issues that arose at the time. So it would be important from now on that any concerns or issues or where there is a sense of a lack of communication, those are escalated, and we have the opportunity to ensure that we've got the position right before we get to the end of the process. So our next election should only be one, which should be just a city council election. Therefore, it should be more straightforward, and we have the opportunity to ensure that the changes we've made are embedded and working very effectively, so that when we then go to a more complex elections process in future, we'll be assured that everything will run smoothly. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I know Councillor Bayliss, and then I've got Councillor Stephen. And James.
I don't like to be critical of the officers, but I think Mr. Flynn said it was a very well-run election. I disagree with that, I'm afraid. I think that was the phrase. I think this was a major mistake. 500 people's postal votes were not delivered. We didn't know about it. In fact, it was only when candidates were knocking on doors saying, have you had your postal vote and have you voted for me? That's like the usual thing that we discovered this. And it was candidates who came back and said, and I do want to say officers responded quickly when they found out there was a problem, and there were people in this room who were busy, very busy between Tuesday and Thursday going around taking postal votes, and that was a monumental effort, and I congratulate people for doing that. But the fact that we made such a big mistake, I think we have to be really honest. A seat in this council was decided by 11 votes. There were 200 that we estimate, I think, or just over 200 that were not returned postal votes. This mistake could have cost an election. I've known in this authority elections to be decided by 3. I've never known them smaller than 3, but 3 votes. Some people were disenfranchised by this. Some people will have ordered a postal vote or asked for a postal vote because they were not going to be around on election day for whatever reason. Probably not holiday because of the restrictions, but they weren't here. They were in hospital. They were doing something. They were visiting a maiden aunt, whatever it was. They weren't going to be here. And so taking them a postal vote between Tuesday and Thursday didn't make up for the fact that they should have had it in good time and been able to complete it and return it. And their democratic rights are are something we all hold hugely important and hold dear. So this was a mistake. I think this report is not as clear and transparent as I'd like it to be. I think the report could be clearer. I think the mistakes, from what I can read between the lines, are the council's mistakes, not with the provider, the external provider in this. I think they're things that we got wrong as an authority. I think we should fess up to that if that is correct, unless I've mistaken. So this was a serious mistake, and I hope we aren't kidding ourselves that we ran this election perfectly, really well, and it went all swimmingly. 500 people being disenfranchised or nearly disenfranchised is a serious issue, and I just want to put that on record. I don't think there's many questions there apart from to say, I hope lessons are learned and that people have had the appropriate training or whatever the appropriate action taken as a result of this.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree. Yes, it was a serious mistake, and I hope it wasn't. Certainly wasn't my intention to suggest that I regarded that as a minor issue in saying that the election was well run. Apart from that one specific issue, I think otherwise our routines were effective in every other case. We have certainly learned lessons from it. There are a set of recommendations in the report, and received today a further wider report on lessons learned from that election. This is something we do after every election, and that contains a further 20 recommendations about potential areas for improvement. So we are taking it very seriously, and we are determined to put arrangements in place to make sure that it doesn't recur in future.
Thank you, Shane. I've now got Louis.
I'd like to make 3 points. It's simply not true that everyone had the chance to vote. I know that the people who said to me, I'd like to vote for you, I wasn't able to vote for you. So I know that first-hand experience that there were votes missing. And that is because although the council staff did an amazing job to rescue the situation, they did a fantastic job. But the fact remains is that people often will have a postal vote, not because they're there waiting at home to receive the new postal ballot form. It's because they're actually away. So delivering them a postal vote form in that week, 2 days before, or the day before, even on the night, really is not acceptable. So, so I think that's, there was a problem. It was minimised, and I thank the staff for that. When you read the executive summary of the report, it's very difficult to really get a clear understanding of exactly what the reason was. And if you don't know what the reason is, it's very difficult then to put a corrective action in place. I think we do need clarity, and I think there always will be mistakes, but what we have to do is learn from those mistakes. And unfortunately, unless it's crystal clear what the mistake was or where the issue was, then our opportunity then for next time corrected is going to be limited. I hope that if it's just one election, it'll be okay, but we cannot know that for sure. So what I would like us to agree is that we do need to see absolute clarity, but we also need to have really good clarity on the quality assurance process, or if there was a problem, that it doesn't rely on a candidate or a member of the public coming forward, that we have a robust system that actually is designed into the system that is an error checking process. So if you were in a manufacturing company, you'd have some sort of system that would allow some sort of tracking and tracing. So be it some sort of dummy ballots or whatever way there are ballots that go into the council, or some sort of system that is enabling us to make sure, because everyone works really hard for elections, and we really do need to make sure that the lessons are learned and we do have a good quality assurance process.
Just, Louis, I tend to agree, and obviously you're an engineer like myself. It would be useful to get a flow diagram of exactly how the process should work, where, it goes to A, yes, no, whatever. That, I don't know, do they exist, Shane? Do we have a flow chart, what I would call a flow chart of the process that staff can use to make sure that we're doing it correctly?
I'm not aware of an existing flowchart. It's certainly a process which we could introduce. I hope to stress in my presentation of the report that we are putting in place quality control checks on a daily basis for every batch, so we can ensure that the totals which are being passed over to the provider are reconciled back to the totals that they've received. But yes, the flowchart setting out the actual transactions that take place and the checks that should take place is one means by which we can then confirm that they've taken place. So that would be a good way of doing that. Yes.
Sorry to labour a point, Jane. And I didn't read it in the document. Have we done anything to ensure that the data that is sent is in the correct format. So i.e. we don't get the position in the future where we send data, but it's not readable by the recipient in the correct, it's not readable in the correct format, should I say, because obviously they read it, it gave them 520 or whatever it was, but obviously they weren't fully, has that been, the IT effectively been rectified?
Yes, the issue with regard to formatting was the fact that we were sending one lot of data for 3 elections. They were receiving it in a format which would have meant sending 3 postal votes to each voter, and wanted it in a format where they could do it in 1 pack. So in situations where we've only got 1 election, then that's not an issue that's going to apply. It's only a question of making sure that the data we send over is the data they receive. And then at the other end, that the data they process and send out is the same as well. And that's about checking the control totals. As it was evident from this, the last election, the control totals we were working to were overall control totals rather than totals on each day. So one of the changes which we're specifying here is that every time a batch is sent over, a file is sent over, there will be a control total reconciliation.
Thank you, Shane. My question has obviously sparked something in Louis' mind as well. So Louis, please come back.
If we look at the problem and we look at what went wrong, it would be possible to put a corrective action in there that means that problem, that specific problem doesn't happen again. But what we really do need to do is make a more systematic approach. So with that flow chart, which Chris has been suggesting, what you could do is you could do what you might call in an engineering and manufacturing term, an FMEA, failure mode effect analysis, where you brainstorm all the things that go wrong in each of the steps, and then put some corrective actions, countermeasures for each one of those things, have some detection, as well as ways to make sure that if physically can't happen, if it did happen, there's some ways to detect it. I think it would be really quite good to have some sort of very systematic approach to look at each of the steps to try and identify all the things that could go wrong and then put some counter actions before next year. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Louis. I've got James and then I've got Lynn.
Chair, thanks very much. Shane, I mean, we all know, we live in a world where some pretty bizarre theories are on various formats, the internet and so forth, about elections. We all know as well that once the integrity of the process is being diminished, for whatever reason, it's very difficult to then put it back into a really workable shape. We're moving not that far away from particularly, 2024. We're looking at quite an extensive sort of election period. Can we be assured that this rolling review process really will give us that degree of rigor at that point? Not for one moment, I'm sure, or is anybody around this room questioning how everybody worked incredibly hard to put right these mistakes, and I applaud their efforts. But I just know as well that once people are, once that incremental diminishing of the belief in the process starts to take place, then it's very difficult to recover. So looking at that 2024 kind of benchmark, as it were, can we be assured that the review process is really rigorous enough to make sure that that particular set of elections is as close to, perfect, for want of a better way of describing it, as we would humanly bring about?
Through you, Chair, nobody more than me, I think, appreciates the need to be absolutely certain that the process is 100% complete and accurate, and that the integrity of the ballot is sustained. We have an election in May 2022, another one in 2023. So there is time to undertake a number of processes before then. We started this review as soon as the election was finished, and we are determined to pick up as many lessons as we can learn as possible. And I've mentioned a wider review that has been going on in the background as well. And we will take the opportunity to rehearse some of these changes in the systems before we get to the actual ballot in next May. that will give us enough assurance. I give everybody a full assurance that everything is working as it should do when we get to the election time. And if necessary, I will bring a further report back to the committee before the election next May, just to give the assurance on the changes and the work that we've done in the meantime.
Thank you, Shane. And now I've got Lynn.
Yes, thank you. I note that it was a particularly complex election this year, and you know, 3 sets of ballot papers in one go, and also 2 questions. I mean, there was a level of uncertainty running up to the local elections in view of the pandemic as to whether they were definitely going to go ahead, whether all 3 strands, as it were definitely going to go ahead. Did that impact on the sort of the planning and the organisation of the elections is my first question. And the second one is, I mean, I note from the report that we've got here, I mean, well done to officers for the sort of detective work and the investigation, is that we haven't previously used Civica electoral services, which puts, you know, another interface in the process and in the flow chart. Are we looking to use them again, or is that there? I don't think there's a specific recommendation here. Yeah, would we use them again, and what are the risks of so doing?
Through you, Chair. The COVID restrictions obviously had an impact in terms of the overall planning and the processes, and a number of changes that we had to go through in terms of the managing the election on the day. It had less impact in terms of the postal vote aspect of the work, and particularly in terms of systems processing. So I would go as far as to say, no, it didn't have a direct impact on in such that it would have affected this particular issue. And it had a wider impact, but in terms of this issue, then no, I don't think it did. The purpose, one of the reasons for using CRS, turning to them, is that they run elections for local authorities across the country. They ran one for us for the bid ballot previously, so we had worked with them previously, so I had good contacts. And they have a high degree of expertise and knowledge of the systems that are involved. So to some extent, involving them has actually increased our professional capacity. It's actually, you know, give us a better understanding of the systems but underlie the process. So they are very valuable in that respect. We were able to discuss this issue with them at length, and they gave us a lot of support in terms of trying to get to the heart of the matter. They were very open and honest and forthcoming in the information they provided. So my intention at this stage is that we do continue to use CES. If we don't, we will need to look to another printer. So there will be a third party involved in one way or another. But I think we can rely on their particular expertise. If I return to a point made earlier by Councillor Bayliss, I think at the end of the day, they were our errors. I mean, I think ultimately it was a communication breakdown, so the errors should have been spotted and dealt with. But I don't think CES could be held responsible for the fact that the 2 files were sent, one of which contained the batch and one didn't. So I don't think there is any failure or culpability on the part of CES, and I don't have any hesitation in using them again for the next election.
Thank you very much, Shane. I don't have anyone else noting that there weren't any questions. That report is for noting only. I assume everyone's happy with noting that. Thank you. So we'll then go on to agenda item 8, which is employee facilities for cycling to work. David?
Thank you, Chair. This report was recommended by this committee and a report into sustainable travel options for staff. This report deals with cycling provision. Reports on other aspects of sustainable travel to work will follow in due course. There are specific objectives and actions regarding cycling to work within the adopted Environmental Sustainability Strategy and Action Plan, which went through Environment Committee and through Council. And specifically talks about providing cycle storage and showering facilities in all workplaces. So, Section 3 of the report just gives information on an existing support scheme. The cycle scheme has been available for some years now. It's It's a national government salary sacrifice scheme, which enables employees to effectively purchase a bike over an extended period through contributions direct from their salary before tax. Also a small benefit for insurance contribution. There's no limit on the spend now. There was a cap previously, so e-bikes can be purchased, cargo bikes, also to use for children. There's a second similar scheme due to become available fairly soon to employees. It works identically, but it will include additional suppliers. So there are a number of suppliers signed up to this, some of the major cycle shops and also some much smaller local shops. There's some figures there on the number of employees that have used the scheme since 2014. Might seem a relatively small number. This is for employees to purchase a new bike. So those who have an existing bike obviously may or may not want to take advantage of it. A second scheme, which is in development really and due to be launched in Q4 of next year, is a shift scheme. This is a relatively small scheme being promoted by the Sustainability and Health in Future Transport organisation. It's a voluntary scheme to incentivise employees to cycle to work, and at work, as an employer, we would make a small donation to charity for the distances travelled on a small per kilometre basis. As I said, we're developing the details of this scheme. Intention, I think, would be that we would donate to charity probably on that, and we launch this for the details developed on that. Section 5 refers to cycling facilities, and there's some examples given there of best practice from national cycling organisations around secure cycle parking, what exactly that does mean in terms of location, facilities, locker storage facilities, showers, which are important for supporting longer journeys, where it's more likely specialist cycling clothing will be worn rather than smaller journeys where normal work attire will. Property Services have done some work on us on feasibility and indicative cost across our main buildings. Some of the buildings, there's no straightforward option to install the facilities. We've got some very old buildings, listed buildings, and some a little bit more challenging. But the preferred options, section 6. So starting with provision at the Guildhall, which would be showers and changings in room G19, which is adjacent to this room. Secure lockable covered cycle parking within the car park. Providing facilities for staff at the crematorium. Also a public bike rack which would support that, and in an open shelter. Works to enhance the refurbishment of the showers up at the depot, which is actually used quite extensively for cycling to work. There's a well-used cycle storage facility there. There's some coverage of some of our other buildings there. Okay, Museum and Art Gallery, where we do have existing facilities. Trinity Street is rather challenging as there's no external space. We do have some facilities at the Mandarin. So the committee's requested to allocate a budget of up to 50,000 to support these facilities. That could be built into our capital programme with a small revenue. We're also proposing to offer cycle training, bikeability training to employees to increase confidence to cycle. Fund that from the existing corporate training budget.
Thank you very much, David. I've got Mark Bayliss, I've got Louis, Stephen, and I've got Lynn Denham. Thank you.
Can I just welcome the proposals and say that they have my full support. I get wrongly accused of being anti-bike on a fairly regular basis. So it's nice to be able to be part of something that we're clearly identified that we are supporting it amongst our own staff. The interesting thing is about showers. Some of those people who are the biggest noises in social media are constantly saying that you don't need showers, but if you're a cyclist, that there's no need. Now, I think the British weather being what it is, it's highly likely that people do need these sorts of facilities if they're going to adapt and adopt bike cycling on a fairly regular basis. So I'm glad we're putting them in there. But it does show that, you know, at least we as an employer recognise that this is a likely need. So I'm prepared to go along with that and support it. But those who say it's not, I wonder if they only go out on dry days. But, yeah, I'll leave it at that in terms of my comments, Chairman.
Thank you. Before Louis, I ask you to come in, I was on a Zoom call the other day with a client who has about £20,000 of bikes on the wall behind him. And he was pretty clear to me that he doesn't cycle in the wet, and he had a £3,000 Peloton in the back of him, which he uses in the winter because cycling in the rain is not, in his view, nice. But yeah, so some people do only cycle in the summer. I agree with you. But anyway, sorry, that was a little side tribe there. Louis.
I'd like to first of all just to talk about the shower question you put in there. Having a shower when you get to work is actually takes quite a lot of time. So quite a lot of people will not shower when they get to work, having been on a bike, if they have a short distance. If they have a long distance and they're using their cycling as a way of getting exercise and then building a sweat, and of course they want to have a shower. But a lot of people don't need a shower when they get to work. They cycle in a more modest way. Some experience when I used to commute to Bosch. I've got quite a lot of questions I'd like to ask, and I've pre-given these questions to David Sutton, so he's got them in his hand. I'm going to sort of perhaps skate through the questions so they're on the record, if that's okay. And then, because you've already got my questions, David, you can hopefully then answer them. Okay. So things like cycle to work schemes, they are great because they actually allow people to buy a bike. They're not the only thing we need. We obviously need to do promotion of cycling. And lots of companies have really good ways of promoting the cycling to their staff. So the first question is, what sort of steps are we doing in addition to providing the cycle to work ability to buy a low-cost bike? What are we doing to actually promote cycling in the workplace? The second thing is, do we have any information or have we done any surveys of how staff are coming to work today? We've got a bit of a breakdown of whether they're walking or cycling or lift sharing and so on. That would be very useful information for the future. I'd like to encourage the council to do some active promotion of things like Bike to Work Week. They're great opportunities often to get people to try cycling once. If they come to, there's a big sort of push to do cycling to work in Cycle to Work Week. Very often people say, "Oh, I enjoyed that," and they continue cycling. So I'd like to see some sort of launch within Bike to Work Week. I'd also like to ask the question about how we promote cycling in terms of induction for new members of staff. You mentioned about shift, and I think that's a great scheme that will hopefully encourage people to not only want to do the right thing for reducing congestion and improve their health, but obviously also to encourage a charitable donation for every kilometre that they do. I think it's a really good scheme. The more publicity that gets, the better. Got a question about lighting as well. It's really important that we have good lighting so people feel safe when they're locking their bikes, not only for the security of their bike, but also many people feel that if there's not sufficiently good lighting in the bike racks, then there might be some security risk, particularly for women and other vulnerable people. Potentially may feel that they would not like to use the bike because they're stuck in a bike shed around the back with poor lighting. So that's something that certainly will need to be considered. In the report, you talk about Trinity Street, and I agree there's very little option really there to do bike racks. But of course, we have got a core market around the corner, and there are some bike racks which are by the pub there. And maybe they could be developed in a way where they could be more covered, or the capacity could be considered for staff as well. We also have the museum and art gallery, and of course, we've talked before about public access to cycling, but I think in this report we are talking about staff. And in the report, you do say that there's adequate provision. I would take issue with that because I've been there several times myself. And at the moment, the demand is low because people are tending not to come to work so much, they're working from home and so on. But I know from first-hand experience as a cyclist, particularly in the summer, you get the fair weather cyclists coming and it's rammed in there. So that is a disincentive for people if they can't lock up their bike. So I think we really should be doing at least doubling the capacity at the Museum and Art Gallery. There's no mention in the report about park workers, people at Gallivant Park or other remote places as well. So we need to think about this in every location as well. And it might be that they are smaller bike racks, less facilities, but we do need to make sure that we have reasonable facilities in all those places. Last 2 points. It's welcome that you're going to be offering bikeability to members of staff, and it'd be good if we could offer that to councillors as well, whether they consider doing that as well. And the last point is about the government scheme that offers 20 pence per mile for cycling as a way of normally perhaps be claiming on your mileage allowance for petrol or diesel. And it's a question, are we adequately publicising that to our members of staff? Oh, that's a big long list, but as you can imagine, it's quite a subject of big concern to us.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I should do my best to capture all of those, please. I'm sure you'll point out if I miss one of them. Right. I was just going to make a comment on the shower facilities just at the start. In the implications of the report, it does mention that we're also doing a wider review into staff facilities across all of our estate. So, for instance, at the Guildhall, where people are moving heavy furniture around and here all day, then provision for showers would be very welcome anyway. So these proposals in this report for cycling support that wider review and provision anyway. So regarding the cycle to work scheme, that is promoted as a staff benefit. It is in the recruitment packs. It's available on our intranet and within all of the employees' information and documents. It's not something you'd see on posters around the building, and I'm sure there's more we can do to promote that, particularly around Bike Work Week, so we can tie that in. We did carry out a survey to support this paper. I think probably to do with the timing and the implications of the pandemic, the numbers were rather small. So rather than bring very small sample survey before the committee as evidence, I think that's something that we look at again. The pandemic, of course, has skewed things quite greatly. And I guess if I touch on the provision at the Museum and Art Gallery, as it says in the report, we need to keep that under review. I agree with you as a user. Yes, that was very full once upon a time. At the moment, not so much. So we need to keep an eye on that. We may get back to that. So yeah, lighting, right? Absolutely, I would totally agree with that. Going to get your bike out on a dark night isn't the best of experiences. Cycling, I talked about that, so that is mentioned in our introduction around there. The employee offers, shift scheme. I take your point regarding Trinity Street. Security of cycling for staff when you're parked up all day is something that is to be taken into account. So the choice to use an on-street there, one of our mainstream secure employee facilities here will be available to staff. Yeah, our parks and our workers at our depots, so Gulliver, Cripplegate and the Purdiswell depot are actually compounds staff can use. So they've got buildings or they've got locked compounds. So they can actually take their bikes within there. Probably not racked within those compounds, but a couple of stuff. So somewhere to lock bikes in there is something, and I can take that away and look at that. I'm sure we can offer bikeability training to councillors. And the final point, yes, we do offer a cycling mileage allowance, as we do for a car driving mileage allowance, and that can be claimed in the usual way. So relatively simply in the same way that car mileage and other expenses are claimed through an online system. And I know of some people that use it, many people that don't. So again, I think we can.
Lynn, I know you were next, but I just wanted to clarify something. That the cycle allowance, like the car allowance, is only for business miles, though, I assume. Not for, so, yeah, okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. I welcome the report and the recommendations and illustration of the work of the Environmental Sustainability Officer. I mean, given the level of questions from Councillor Stevens, it does make me think what level of consultation have we actually done around this report and those facilities? It seems as though it might have been a more robust piece of work. Yeah, my question is, what level of consultation has there been around it? In terms of promoting and encouraging more people to try cycling to work, I mean, we had a very interesting report at the Health and Wellbeing Committee, last one, about active travel, and discovered that in fact there are 2 e-bikes in the basement here which are not being used. I think I can think of many potential uses for those, and actually to loan them to staff to try out before they commit to a bike to work scheme could be a very useful. Could be very useful. And my final question, I mean, picking up about the public access, and a number of us have been lobbying and concerned about public access for people on bikes to the museum and art gallery. The crematorium, so are there any public facilities for cycling there? I genuinely don't know, and I'm mindful that it isn't just for, people don't go just for services, but also, to visit the grounds, to visit graves. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the first question was asked was around consultation. As I said, we did a survey. We did an all-staff survey. We didn't get a huge amount of responses, but we had 10 or 12 responses came back. Inevitably, quite a few from people who already cycle and were looking for improvements or things that would help them at other locations. The report refers to quite a number of best practice sources, so we relied on those quite heavily about what would be best practice facilities to provide. And our property professionals have visited the sites. I've got some knowledge myself, being a cyclist, and so I have fed into it to some degree. But Ruth Corral has done most of the work on this, and she's talked to a number of people in different buildings. Perhaps not as in depth as we would have liked, but I do think we've covered the ground pretty well. Yes, there are a couple of e-bikes in the basement, and actually I used one of them myself last week for a tour around some of the town investment plan sites. I think one of the challenges there is this building is particularly challenged for cycle storage, and the basement is not a place to store bikes to make them usable. So the proposals to put something at the back in the car park and pick up the keys from reception, that should work in a far more friendly way, able it to promote it properly, so you don't have to carry a bike up and down the steps. Then finally, the proposals in the report for the crematorium, there is a yard and a depot there which will serve the staff that actually are based there. We've also got proposals for a cycle rack to go in the car park for members of staff who are visiting, and that would also be available.
Thank you, David. I've got 3 questions now, because you just raised one. First one, the scheme for buying a bicycle open to staff, I'm assuming that's not open to members. I'm looking at the MD now. I assume that's not open to members because we're not employees.
In answer to your question, Chair, I think you're probably right, because it is an offer to employees, and as you quite rightly stated, members are not employees. But we could, I would ask that we go away and check just that in terms of what eligibility we might wish to extend that to.
Thank you for the clarification. The next one, I support this completely. Oh,
Just a procedural point, it's not for officers to determine really, and that is not going to go at David, but it's not for officers to determine whether we are in scope or not. It's for the council. It's part of our remuneration package in that sense. It's something you would ask the independent remuneration panel to consider, and they would then come forward with a recommendation that the council would adopt, whether we did it or not. It's like any other aspect of the remuneration we get. That's just a point of clarity on process, I think, on that.
yeah, my question was whether we're included now, but how we go about that. But I'll hand back to the MD because I think he wants to come back. No, okay.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that officers make a determination as to what members receive, merely answering the question in terms of checking whether they are eligible at the moment. Of course, yeah.
My next question, I say I'm fully supportive of this paper. I think it's really good what we're doing, because I cycle quite a bit as well. However, we're about to spend £50,000, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but I think it's a good cause. What I'd like to know is sort of elaborates it was a bit more detailed than Councillor Stevens' question. I'd like to know how many people are cycling now, and how many people are cycling in 6 months, 12 months time. And I know it will vary between the winter and the summer, because it would be useful to know how many people have shifted as a consequence of the new facilities. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't spend the money, but it would be good to see. We've now, we've got 13 people at the moment on the bike scheme. I'm assuming 13 people cycle work-ish. I may not be right, but we might have 10 people now. Have we got 30 people at the end of next year? Or have we got 12? It'd be useful to see what the impact of these additional facilities are. And my final one is, we talked about the electric bikes downstairs. It's more of a comment than a question. No, it's not. It's a question. Aren't we now having our enforcement officers on electric bikes? Did I hear someone telling me that we are now moving towards putting enforcement officers on electric bikes so they can go to different parts of the city?
Okay, if I may, and then I'll see to Louis on that one. So yes, you're quite right, Chair, that we have some more information on how many staff cycle to work at the moment. If I was making an estimate, I would say at least a couple of dozen staff regularly cycle to work. But the pandemic and of course the current position makes that really, really difficult to make a proper assessment. But we would like to look at that and then look back in the future and see how successful this has been in terms of that. I don't have an answer on the enforcement officers and e-bikes, so.
About a week or two ago, I had spent a day with the enforcement staff. It was in my role as health and safety champion. I did raise the question about cycling, and what I was told was that it is offered to people. They are allowed to do it, but there is a question about people's confidence to use the bike in terms of the traffic and so on. So things like the bikeability thing, the so-called cycle proficiency thing, is for not only children but adults as well. So I think once that's rolled out, that will be really helpful. That takes away one barrier. Another barrier is that there aren't actually bike racks in the St Martin's Gate car park. Again, that's addressed in this report as well. So if you just tick away, you start going through the bikeability thing, the bike racks, the showers, there are lots of barriers to cycling. What you've got to do is gradually just sort of take away the excuses, and then eventually, with good encouragement, you can get people cycling. But I think there would be ability to do this, but there's some things that need to happen first.
Thank you, Louis. I make a suggestion that maybe we look at the job specifications of people becoming enforcement officers, one of them being the willingness to get on a bike. I don't know. HR aren't here. They'll probably be falling over, but I don't, surely you, yeah, that's not the ability to use a bike. I suppose travelling to outside. Anyway, I'll leave that. We're getting into very dodgy waters there, but I don't see why that's too difficult myself. But okay, Louis, thank you. The reason I asked that question was because I knew the enforcement officers were going out to a part of the city the other day, and I thought they were using the bikes to do it, but never mind. That is agenda item 8. We're 5 minutes over when I think the concert started, so I apologise. But unless anyone has any other business, I think we're complete. No, thank you very much, everybody. For those going to the concert, enjoy yourselves. Apologies, I do apologise. Thank you for those in favour of approving the recommendation of £50,000. Please raise your hands. That is again unanimous. Thank you.